the laws. We're finishing up the laws of Muktzeh, of the first chapter of the laws of Muktzeh, and then we'll move on to the next one, which is about the laws of Muktzeh connected to basis l'davar ha'aser, things that become a support, a base for Muktzeh. Hold on, let's just bring up the text. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay, so we're holding in chapter 88, we're holding law number 16. Again, in the laws of Muktzeh. So it says like this, we were talking about, we finished off, if you remember, about a person who passes away on Shabbos. Well, what do we do if someone passes away on Shabbos? The body is Muktzeh. So now in law 16, the Kitzur continued. Let's just let Rebecca in. So the halacha continues. Im nofla deleka v'reim shelo yisaref hameis. Hey, Rebecca. If a fire breaks out and there's a concern that the corpse will be burnt from the fire, right? So we just said before that the body is muktzeh. So what do we do? Is mutar l'taltalei agav davar heter. Then you could carry the body, means to move the body out of harm's way from being burned through a permissible object or a permitted object. What does that mean? Dahainu, meaning shemanichim alav oy etzloi eze dvar machal. You put on or next to the body food when you're allowed to move food on Shabbos. Umetalta shneim biyachin, you carry them together. So you're carrying the corpse on the account of the food which is permissible. So then you would be able to move the body out of harm's way from being burnt. V'im ein dvar machal, let's say for whatever reason there's no food around for you to place next to the corpse. Is manichen alav ezekli oy malbush shemuta betiltal. So next best thing is to use a vessel or clothing that's permitted to be carried. So something that's permitted to be carried, it's not food. Food is the first option. Second option is an article or a clothing that is permissibly to be carried on Shabbos, to place it on or next to the corpse, and then to move the corpse on account of the permissible article. V'im gam ze'ayin, and if this is also for whatever reason not available, then worst case scenario, you could carry the body on its own because of the concern of the body being burned. Either way, you could only move it in a permissible way, meaning you can't take it out to public domain. So within a private domain itself, or within the space of a permissible way of moving. But if it's to go and take the corpse out of a place that on Shabbos is prohibited to carry, then you have to find a non-Jew. And like we're going to learn further about the laws of how do we communicate menuchah to a non-Jew, but either way, you would have to find a non-Jew in order to move it out into, let's say, a public domain. Obviously, if there's an Erev, it's not a problem, or if it's a Carmelis, if it's within a Rosh Hashanah, it's not a problem. We're talking about a case where you'd be carrying into a public domain or into a Carmelis, which would be prohibited from a private domain. Again, even within a public domain, if you could move it within 4 cubits and it would preserve the body in that way, that's also permissible. But in the event where there's no option to move it into carrying over from one domain to the next, you would have to find a Gentile to do it. You can't transgress the Shabbos on behalf of the corpse in such a way. Okay, so let's see the footnotes on this. The Kitzur says like this: you move them together, meaning you place either an article or food. This method is permitted only to prevent debasing the corpse. Mr. Brewer says you can't use this in other events. Means if just to move the body because you want to move it to someplace else, you can't use this leniency of moving something permissible just to move the body. They're only talking about in a case of where the body will be burnt, God forbid. So then for that concern, then we allow the leniency of agav. Agav means on behalf, together with the permissible thing. So it's a leniency that's allowed in this situation. Okay. Or a garment that may be handled if you don't have food. The clothes of the corpse are deemed sufficient for this according to Shulchan Aruch. Now, that's a good question. What do you mean? Most people, a good percentage of people, let's say, pass away in their clothing, in some sort of clothing, whether it's pajamas or clothing. So is that enough? Are the clothing the corpse is wearing, is that enough? Is that sufficient enough to move the body? So he says, yes, that the clothing, according to the Shulchan Aruch, the clothing itself that the corpse that are deemed sufficient for this according to the Shulchan Aruch. Beis Yosef and Magen Avram questioned this. Okay, Shulchan Aruch, it's interesting. The Shulchan Aruch and the Beis Yosef are traditionally the same person. The Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, is the author of the Shulchan Aruch. So he says Shulchan Aruch 3:11-4. I'm assuming he means the Rabbi Yosef Cairo himself. Rabbi Yosef Cairo has two works of law. I mean, he has other publications, but two main works of law that we have from the Beis Yosef is the Beis Yosef, which is his commentary on the Torah. And based on his commentary on the Torah, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, who lived in Sfas about 500 years ago, he put together the Shulchan Aruch, his own code of the Jewish law. So there was the Arba Turim, which is one of the first bases of the Shulchan Aruch that was published by Yaakov Balaturim. On that, the Beis Yosef has a commentary, but Rabbi Yaakov Balaturim lived kind of in that generation that passes over from the Rishonim Tachronim. His father was the Rosh, and so in the time of Mayor of Rottenburg, they moved to Spain. So the Arba Turim put together the four Turim, which is the basis of the Shulchan Aruch. On that is the commentary of the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef himself, Rabbi Yosef Kari, authored the Shulchan Aruch. So in the Shulchan Aruch, he says the clothing is sufficient, but in his commentary on the Torah, Beis Yosef seemingly, and the Magen Avram, which is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch itself, questions this: if the clothing are enough that the corpse is wearing, or you need to put other clothing on it. Now the question is, it seems according to the Shulchan Aruch that food is option number one. So seemingly we would assume that if food's available, even according to the opinion that the clothing is enough, you should still try to use food because food is the first option, seemingly. That's what I would understand. Question this, and the Bir halacha forbids even making use of the corpse bed for this purpose. Even the bed, which is a permissible thing. You could call a bed like a keli, like a permissible article that you could carry. You're allowed to carry a bed. But and we're going to learn in chapter 89 about basis and davar aser, the base of something that is aser is only if it was the aser, the thing aser was on it when the Bein Hashmashos comes in. Otherwise, it's just something that is holding something aser. And it could be while it's on there, like we learned about the chickens that are going on the boxes, you could shoo them off. But even in such a case, according to the Bir halacha, the bed is not sufficient. So you would have to place either other clothing or food. I'm assuming even according to the Shulchan Aruch that says the clothing is good, that would be option number 2 if there's no food available. But maybe I'm wrong on that also. Okay, footnote number 60. What are we talking about? If this is also available, you may move it by itself. Okay, so even if we're talking about obviously in a scenario where the body is unclothed, this is because otherwise the person may panic and extinguish the fire. So why are we lenient according to the Kitzur? That if there's no clothing or articles or food available, you could actually move the corpse itself, because then the person may panic and extinguish the fire, which is a violation of Daraisa. It's a biblical violation to not put out a fire. We're going to learn that in coming weeks, right? You're not allowed to burn a fire or put out a fire, which is a more serious transgression than moving the corpse according to Masechah Shabbos 43, the Talmud. Okay. In footnote, that covers the footnotes for this law. Okay. So basically, you're allowed to move it out, but you're not allowed to move it out to public domain. You would have to find a Gentile for that, because then otherwise you're transgressing. The only reason you're allowed to move the corpse is, even if it's unclothed, is because we're scared the person doesn't extinguish the light with the fire, which is a more severe transgression. So carrying out into public domain is also a transgression. You're not allowed to do it on behalf of the corpse. Again, to move it within 4 cubits within a public domain is permissible. But that would not be sufficient. There's not enough space. Okay. And if there's an Erev or a private domain, again, this may seem like a far-fetched reality, but it's very possible it is a reality. Okay, let's go further, unfortunately. Okay, now we're learning about what's known as things that are extremely ma'us, extremely people avoid, which is called they have a name for it. It's called a the Hebrew word is a graf shel re'i. Okay, so let's learn chapter 17. Those days, I once was in a in a what do they call it? An antique shop, and we bought what do they call it? A bedside table, and on the bedside table had inside the cupboard had a piece of stone, like a piece of marble. Why? Because the piece was when they used to have the potties by the bed, so they didn't have toilets. So are you allowed to move those on Shabbos? And that's still applicable till today, obviously, with children's potties, right? So kol dover mitunaf, something that's repulsive, such as dung, goineri, viki, tsoya, wretch or excrement, things that are mamish, a person are disgusted by them. Bein shel adam, bein shel tarnagolim, doesn't make a difference if it's human or animal, or if it's even a chicken. Imheim bebayis, if they're in the house, the reason why we mentioned chicken, because those days possibly chickens were running around the house, was less likely to have a goat or a cow in the house. So im heim bebayis a b'chotzer, if they're in the house or in your yard, and you don't want to step in it. Sheyeshun sham b'nei adam, where people are. Aaron, are you trying to speak? If you are, there's no sound coming up. Aaron, are you trying to say something? Okay. So if mutar lahitzi la'ashpa, so if it's in the house or in a yard where people are, so mutar lahitzi la'ashpa, you can take it out to the garbage, to the trash. Ukshemaitzi graf shel re'i, and if you have something that's repulsive, so if it's in the house or the yard, you could remove it and take it to the garbage. So what happens when you are a bedpan that wants to be emptied, whether it is of number one or number two? As long as you're holding it in your hand. So let's say it's for a child, right? You can put it back as you're holding it, because to put it back, although it's become muktzeh because of it's something that's repulsive, but you could move it back to its place because you're already holding it. Like we said before, that if you're holding something, you could put it where you like. But once you put it down, because now it's becoming repulsive. It's not your regular, your ordinary muktzeh of repulsiveness, because this is more extreme. But if you need it to be used for people, so then you could put it back. Again, Barbara, this would apply in questions in the hospital, obviously. And also, if you can put water in the bedpan, and obviously a human wouldn't drink out of it, but an animal can, then it may be returned in that way. We'll see the footnotes on that. Okay. Barbara, is my sound coming over okay? Do you guys hear me? No, I hope so.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, what'd you say?
Are you hearing me? Is the sound coming over okay?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Everything working fine.
Okay, because that's how everyone's trying to speak. All right.
No, I was just trying to turn on my speaker on my phone.
Okay. So we have 61. Footnote 61 is if there's dung in the yard. This rule applies also if it is in a place where people walk, meaning it doesn't have to be the yard if it's on the sidewalk, right? So says the Mishnah Berurah through 8:31. Same thing applies if you have dogs or pets at home. Okay, 62 is, but once you put it down, you are forbidden to move it because it's extremely repulsive. See Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Alter Rebbe 30873, and the Mishnah Berurah 38136. But, and it's worse than ordinary muktzeh due to repulsiveness, he says like this. what is muktzeh machmas smias? We discussed this before. We're going to go back to the chart soon. Of muktzeh due to repulsiveness is ruled permissible on Shabbos, unlike Yom Tov. However, something as repugnant as a used bedpan is considered a non-vessel, since it has no use whatsoever. Once it becomes soiled, you would never use it for anything else because it's soiled with what's in the bedpan. So therefore, that's considered a graf shel re'i is an extreme muktzeh machmas miyas, with something that you put set aside because it's repulsive, it could still be used. But in the case of the bedpan, now if again, so says the Shulchan Aruch Rav Mishnah Brura, but he says, but if it's in a situation where the animal could drink, meaning to say, according to some, this method is applicable only to prevent the bedpan from being lost. So says the Mishnah Brura Shulchan Aruch Rav. It is interesting to note that the Chazan Ish, which is another author who passed away about 1945 or so, opinion that repulsiveness renders something a non-vessel only if it makes the object totally useless, whereas a bedpan still remains useful for its purpose. He maintains that the necessity to add water is relatively recent restriction, means to add water to make it usable again for an animal. So basically, the question is, I mean, obviously, so if you're in a situation, people need to use it, right? People don't change. If I'm Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong. But in a hospital, right? It's not disposable bedpans, right? They're reused, right?
Well, they're reused just for that resident, but once the resident leaves, they're thrown away.
They are they're used for that same resident only as long as they're there, and then
Yes.
okay. I mean, it's good to know. So let's say a person who has hold on, Aaron, a person who has a bedpan and obviously needs to be used again. Obviously, people use it more than once, especially in the days where they didn't have a toilet. So it's if you can use it in a way that it has to be. If he says like before, if for instance but to put it back for use for someone, that's obviously rather be moved back, or if you put in water. So the Chazon Ish adds that the Chazon Ish is usually sometimes strict. He says over here that the repulsiveness renders something non-vessel only if it makes the object totally useless, whereas a bedpan still remains useful for its purpose. So he doesn't hold it. You have to even put in water to make it usable again because it's always been used. Like Barbara says, they use it again for the same patient over and over again. Yes, Aaron.
What about two things, diapers and like a cat litter box?
So that would fall under the initial law. Excellent question. The initial law that you're allowed to throw it out because if it's repulsive, but once you put it down in a place, you can't move it again. Now, the question obviously is, let's say you're changing a diaper. Anyone who's a parent who changes a diaper, the moving of the diaper is a process, right? You'll first put it on the side and continue to attend to the child, and then usually you pick up the diaper and do what you do with it, whether it is empty it or throw it out, etc. Right? So we're obviously talking about here he says Zman shakli adayin biyadei muter lachziroi kedin kol muktzeh shebiyadei muter talta nichbach mshirza. But over here he says kishisrichim lekav debris muter lachziroi. I'm assuming that would apply also in this case. Just a diaper can't be left on the floor. That's not something that people do. So a diaper that's been soiled, right? If it's not soiled, there's nothing wrong with it. But if it's been soiled, so you can't expect a parent who has an infant on a changing table to walk and especially if you don't have a garbage or a disposable nearby, to leave the baby and put it in the garbage because you're holding it in your hand, you're not going to put it down. That wouldn't make sense. It'd be no different than if there was dung on the floor that you can move it to the garbage. We're talking about once you put it down in a place of location, so then to move it again. I feel confident to say that that's the case. Obviously, people don't leave diapers around. That's not safe for the
So
children.
you're saying is that the table is considered one thing, and so you put it on the changing table, you change the baby, and then you could walk it to the baby genie, the trash can.
Yeah. I'm 99%. Even though the wording over here is aval achshar nichem miyadei asal tatlei mishum temas tfei, means what does it mean that it's repulsive? You can't touch it anymore. It hasn't been muktzeh yet. It means when you put it down and you don't want to touch it again. But here you never put it, when you put a diaper down to continue changing the baby, you know in your mind you're going to finish changing the baby and pick up the diaper and put it in the garbage. It's part of the process of moving it away. Just because it's not in your hand anymore, it's just not possible. And it's dangerous to expect the parent to leave the child and go throw it in the garbage because it's in your hand, you're not allowed to put it down. Right? You understand?
Yeah.
No different than if the animal would do something in your house that you'd allow to move it. This is a diaper has to be removed.
Okay.
Okay. Footnote. Do we do the footnotes on this? Yes. So let's do the last law of 88. So he says like this: Mortar litin kli tachas adelf b'Shabbos. Okay, this happens all the time, right? I've just experienced this in my home, where you have a leak, right? And if you have a leak, are you allowed to put? Now, this is not a question of basis l'davar asa. Here we're not talking about a question of turning something into a support, a base for muktzeh. Here we're talking about creating a graf shel re'i. A graf shel re'i is a despicable gathering. So here, by having a receptacle under the leak, depending what's leaking, right? It all depends on the content of the leak. So mutter litin kli tachas hadelf b'Shabbos. You're allowed to put a vessel, like a bowl, what have you, under the leak on Shabbos, which could be all the time, especially now in the winter with the rain. And what happens if it fills up? You could pour it out, obviously in a way that's permissible on Shabbos. You can't pour it out on your yard because they're planting on Shabbos, but in a way that'd be permissible in the sink or in the toilet. You could put it back to its place to continue collecting the leak. So here he's strict. Says, what kind of water are we talking about? If the water has to be able to be used for washing, fit for washing. But if the water is dirty, because you're creating, so to say, a graf shel re'i, which is a bedpan. Although this is not exactly a bedpan, but the term used for things that are made into something that's ma'os, that's despicable, extremely despicable, is called graf shel re'i. So you're making a graf shel re'i intentionally by putting the thing there. Now the question is obviously a lot of questions here. Where is the leakage? What is it leaking onto? Why would that be different? Why would it be advisable to let the water, if it's the ma'os, to drip on the carpet or in the bedroom or on the children's things? Why is that different than moving dung from the dining room if an animal defecates in the room? So he says if the leakage is not usable for washing, it's also you're not allowed to put a bowl under there because you're not allowed to make a graf shel re'i, a bedpan, which is the term lechatchila initially. But if you did put it there, and now it's disgusting, then you are allowed to take it out. And he says in the parentheses, didn't muktzeh b'makim hefsed gadol ayin li'il simin pei sivdal v'dini muktzeh b'yamte v'dini muktzeh machmas mitzvah yivar imir s'shem b'mekayim. He says things about when there's hefsed gadol, when there's a question of muktzeh, because we're now finishing the chapter of muktzeh at an expense of a great loss, or the laws of Yom Tif, or muktzeh because of a mitzvah, will be explained in its proper place. Okay, let's understand the law, footnote number 65, about making a graf shel re'i, a new bedpan on Shabbos. Okay, right? Obviously this takes a little more explaining, especially like I said. The question here is, what is the alternative of not placing the bowl under the leak? Oh, okay. Explanation. Let's explain what we're talking about. Making a vessel that had other uses into a bedpan destroys the potential of the other use. Okay, that's the problem of making a graf shel re'i. If you put something in a bowl, right? If you were to take a salad bowl and turn it into a bedpan, it's no longer going to be used for salad bowl. You would never make salad in there again, right? So you're making a vessel that has other use, it could be used for salad bowl, and destroys it on Shabbos. So that's what it means to make a graf shel re'i on Shabbos that's prohibited on Shabbos. The potential of the other use. The Ramban, Nachmanides, found this comparable to destroying, any kind of destroying. You're destroying the bowl. It was a usable bowl. It's no longer a bowl. It doesn't apply to a bedpan that's already been a bedpan. A menuchah prohibited on Shabbos. You're not allowed to destroy on Shabbos. Note, this ruling of the author is based on Shulchan Aruch and Rambam. Tur, like I said, the Tur is the arbiturum, however, is more lenient and rules that you may place a vessel there. I'm talking about water that's not washable, even if the water is not fit for anything. Bir halacha points to this ruling as the source for our washing our hands in the morning into a vessel, negelvasser. That's a great question. I'm not sure why that's the shaila. Negelvasser is we wash our hands in a bowl by the bed, right? Not down the sink. So if you're washing your bowl by the sink, the water is tamei. So theory is, why is that not considered making a graf shel re'i? I'm not sure why this is any different than a set aside bedpan, because usually you wash negelvasser in a bowl that you use repeatedly, right? We have negelvasser in our home. Every night we use the same bowl and cup to wash our hands. So that would be like you're not making a graf shel re'i that's never used for anything else. But the water is not disgusting because you're not washing your hands that are mamish dirty. It's more spiritual dirty, right? It's impure, and you're not allowed to drink the water. You have to spill it out. But the Bir halacha says, in theory, should be considered making a graf shel re'i on Shabbos. You're making a bedpan on Shabbos. I'm not exactly. I have to check the details of the question because I'm not sure why it'd be different than any bedpan. A bedpan doesn't have to be used on Shabbos to be a bedpan, assumingly. Points this ruling the source of our of washing our hands in the morning into the vessel negavasa. Though the water is totally unfit for after washing because the water is impure. The same applies to mayim achronim. Same thing would apply to water that we use after a meal, right? When you have the little water that's passed around the table, why isn't that considered making a graf shel re'i? Again, I'm wondering if this is the case if you have a set mayim achronim set, right? People have in their house the mayim achronim set that is used for washing your hands repeatedly, and unless the law of graf shel re'i of a bedpan applies, you're not allowed to use a bedpan that hasn't been used yet. It doesn't seem like that would be the case, because otherwise, how are you supposed to use bedpans in the week during Shabbos? Not all bedpans have things inside when Shabbos comes in. The same applies to mayim achronim, the washing done before birchat hamazon. This has to be examined more. But the real question that I have here is not so much the negelvas and the mayim achronim, which are usually things that are set aside for this. But the question would be in a leak, like what are you supposed to do? According to, the Torah says is that is lenient. So we have who to be relying on. But if you have a leak in your house, hold on, Aaron, that's going on your carpet and is actually doing more damage. It seems from the Kitzur, you have to let it leak. And that could be also okay. That could maybe fall under the idea of harmfulness. Maybe you could kind of dry it, and even drying is a question because of squeezing. This whole law has to be examined a bit more. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, just use this as an example and try to come up with the answer for all that we're talking about now. In the olden days, they didn't have water that came in through a pipe, so you only had a basin and a cup, and you would wash your hands in it, and then all day you'd wash in the same bowl. Do you have to get rid of the water, or it's going to overflow?
No. So that's not the point. You have to understand something. The washing of your hands, the water is not you could use it. The water doesn't become disgusting. The problem that we're challenging is negelvasser and machronim are spiritually unclean, right? They're tamei. The water, let's say, why do we wash negelvasser in the morning? Because our hands are impure, right? So that water, you have to be very careful. Water from negelvasser, let's say you place your negelvasser by your bed, which is our custom, right? So the Bir halacha is saying how you allowed to do that on Shabbos. When you wash your hands, you're turning the bowl into a graf shel re'i, into a bedpan. Now, why is it a bedpan? Because the water is just as the water spiritually as if it was as if it was pee, right? So
Okay.
so you're not. But the thing is that most people use negelvasser with a set of negelvasser. It means that you have every night the same washing basin that they use
Correct.
every night. Same thing with mayim achronim. Most people, which means basically to deal with this question, and if I'm right in my assumption, it's better to have some people are either lazy or just don't have a mayim achronim set at home, right? So you just take 2 cups and you pour quickly the water 1 cup into the next. That's more problematic than if you had a set aside mayim achronim set, because then you're making a cup that you would drink out of, because the mayim achronim you don't drink out of. It's only used for washing your hands after meal. But if you're just taking 2 cups and washing your hands 1 cup into the next cup, that's more problematic because you're creating a graf shalari. The Bir halacha says it's not a problem because we have the Torah to rely on.
But let me ask you this then, just to be, as the custom says, to use a bowl and a cup, what's the size have to be considered not a cup?
No, it doesn't make a difference what it is. You have water that's clean, and then you wash the tips of your fingers, right?
Yeah.
That goes on to into another cup, right? That's how we do the mayim achronim usually, right?
Right. It's the whole set.
So exactly. So the Bir halacha says, are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? Maybe you're creating a bedpan on Shabbos. Why? Because when you wash we just said like this, that water that comes from a leak, if it's unusable for washing, then you're not allowed to put a bowl, you're not allowed to put a receptacle under it, because you're turning that receptacle into a graf shalari, into a bedpan, right?
Okay.
So the question is, besides the question is what are you supposed to do if you have a leak? The question is, according to the Bir halacha says that that's the case, that the water is not usable. That applies to negel vaser and mayim achronim, because the water is not usable. So then by washing your hands in the morning by your bed, or washing your fingertips by the meal, you're creating a graf shalari. The question is, if that applies to a set, like you said, your mayim achronim set, that you only use for that, why is that different than any bedpan? Even if it's called making it a bedpan, but that's what the bowl is for. You didn't change, you didn't destroy it. What do we say the pshat is? That the Ramban says it's called soiser. You're destroying it from another use. You don't have any other use for it. It's never used for anything else than washing your hands, right? And the same thing would apply to negel vaser and mayim achronim. It would become more problematic if you don't have a set and you use what you would typically use to drink out of. Then it's a problem, because then you're taking your cup that you would like to use out of and you're pouring into water that's not usable.
So you're saying is that, okay, because I see this all the time. You drink, and then it's time to say the blessings after the meal. So there's a few drops left of the drinking water. They use it to wash the tips of their hands.
Into another cup.
Right.
At the end, the Bir halacha says that we don't have the problem because we rely on the Torah that's lenient. Means that the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch doesn't quote the Torah. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch himself means, when I say the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, it means the text that we're learning, right? He says that you're not allowed to put unusable water, water that you can't wash with, into a bowl, because you're creating a bedpan on Shabbos that's prohibited. Okay. And the Ramban explains that's like destroying the bowl. It seems to be only in a case where you're using a bowl or receptacle that has other uses. But if that is its use, why is it different than a bedpan that obviously is usually cleaned on Shabbos before you use it, and then you use it, right?
Right.
So that like Barbara says, right? If you have a patient in the hospital, every time you use it, you clean it. You don't leave it dirty. So but it's not a problem, because you're not destroying it. That is its use. So the negel vaser and the mayim achronim, if you have a set, that's its use. It would become a problem if you're using your cup, which it's not its use. Then it could be a problem. Then you have the Bir halacha says, but the Torah says it's still not a problem because we're not concerned about placing a bowl under leak. The question really comes into mind, according to the text, according to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, what do you do if you have a leak with dirty water? According to the Bir halacha, according to the actual Kitzur, it seems like you have to let it drip. What about if it's going on carpet? What happens if it's going in a kid's bedroom? What happens if it's really repulsive and you don't want it on the floor? So you have to let it go on the floor, and it's liquid, right? It's not like something you could just scoop up. So all these things have to be examined just a bit more. Yes, Barbara.
Well, you're talking about this, and I'm thinking this hits me hard, because one morning I got up and was getting ready for work, came downstairs, and the next thing I know, I have all this water leaking down my house. And so at what point do you say, I mean, if this was Shabbat and I have all this water leaking down, I mean, in through my pantry, in my kitchen, in my living room area, because something failed upstairs. I mean, wouldn't I have a responsibility to stop that?
Now, if you could turn off, if it's to say your bath is overflowing, you could turn off something that's permissible to turn off. It's not a problem. Let's say you have a leak that you can't fix on Shabbos, right? So could you put a bowl under? If the water is clean, a lot of times the water coming through is clean, right? It's not, you wouldn't drink it, but when we say roy l'rachitza means, it doesn't have to mean it's your first choice of water to wash your hands with, but you would wash your hands with if you needed to. When you have repulsive, sometimes you have a leak that's really disgusting, right? You wouldn't touch it with your hands. It could be even contaminated water, right? So then according to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, you're not allowed to put a bowl under it because you're creating, you're destroying the bowl from other use. You're turning a graf shalerie. You're turning it into a bed.
If you're using a bucket, I mean, let's say you have a bucket and that's it, that's what it's used for. It's
That's-
used for dirty water.
That's what I'm saying. So that's the question. I mean, yeah. For instance, if you have a mop bucket, right, that you put in detergent.
Yeah.
Detergent is also something you wouldn't drink. You would never drink out of the bucket of the mop because it's you put detergent in the you put things that are not that could really harm you if you were to drink out of it, right? So that's the same question as the bedpan or the question of the mayim achronim. Why would that? What's wrong to use those kind of receptacles, even according to the Kitzur? I mean, we have who'd rely on that the Torah that we quoted that says that he's lenient and rules you may place the vessel there. But but based on what he said over here in this footnote that I'm bringing up again, that the Ramban Nachmani says that this falls under the law of stira, of destroying. Stira would only be if you're using a salad bowl for, let's say, a leak that's contaminated, and then the salad bowl becomes unusable. At least now on Shabbos you can't use it, right? So, but to use a bucket that's used for sponge for mopping, that you don't care about it, and you just pour it down the sink and put it back in its corner. That seems to be. I mean, again, this is the Kitzur. We have to obviously look at the laws more in detail. Again, even what we have so far, would rely on the Torah that says it's permissible. But that's not the opinion of the Kitzur himself. He doesn't quote the Torah. He rules that's not permissible. So if you were just to read the text of law number 18, based on its original text, without the opinions of the Torah, you would say that if you have a leak that's dirty water, you're not allowed to put a receptacle on it. And the question would be, what kind of receptacle? If we're talking about a graf shalerie that's already graf shalerie, like a sponge bowl, a mopping bucket, then you're not really destroying anything. I think what he means to say over here is to put a vessel that's not a mopping bucket. I'm assuming. I don't want to rule because he doesn't say that. He could say that. He doesn't say that, but I'm assuming that would be the law because again, the logic would be based on a bedpan that's made and set aside for that use. You're allowed to use in Shabbos. It doesn't have to have things in it that it's already been used before Shabbos that it's not usable. It's just because it's set aside for that, and therefore I would assume the same thing would apply with negavas, and the same thing would apply to mayim achronim.
Okay.
But I don't want to rule on that without any prior knowledge, so we'll circle back on that next week. Let's see, maybe I have something in our footnotes here that would help us to walk away with that without having to walk away with something we don't know. Let's just see over here. It's not in this law, but it could be in our documents over here. Oops, the documents are offline. Hold on. Okay. Graph shall re is that one of the Muktzeh value, prohibited use. Muktzeh by definition, items used for permissible activities, food, books, and people. Okay, we're not covering over here. Graph shall re. Oh, repulsive. What does he say over here? Repulsive. Maybe moved, in other words, dirty diaper. Okay, so the dirty diaper he quotes, which is what we spoke about, is allowed to be removed. Dangerous muktzeh. Okay, I mean, I would assume that a leak could also be defined as dangerous. But the question is, then you would have to let it leak and then clean it up, and then be a question if you're allowed to clean it up in a way of you're not allowed to use towels and Shabbos to pick up large amounts of liquids. Hold on 1 second. Let's see if we have something here. Oh, let's see what we have. Graf shel re'i. Number 8. I don't know if you see that on your screens. So graph shalavi is repulsive items. Definition: Muktzeh, items that cause discomfort or disgust in living areas. Examples: dirty diapers, garbage with odor, which is also dead insects indoors. Halacha: Shabbos and Yom Tov may be removed to preserve human dignity. Removal is allowed only to a reasonable location, not for convenience alone. Okay. Doesn't go into this question that we have in Law 18. All right, I'm comfortable almost 99% to say that something that's if you have a leak, again, these are not things that don't happen. These are things that happen all the time. That if you first all we have would rely on, which is the Torah. Aaron, you're trying to ask something?
Yeah, what about floods like hurricanes and stuff?
What about floods and hurricanes?
So it's more than a leak.
But and what's the question? If God's allowed to make a flood on Shabbos?
No, I'm not asking anything about God. I'm asking about cleanup. So what can you take buckets and fill them because it makes it a bedpan and remove the water from the house?
Again, seemingly, we have the Torah clearly that says that he says it's okay. But seemingly, the question would be, so I hear your question. Let's say you have a hurricane or a big storm, and you need to use salad bowls, right?
Right.
So then, so then we would have a question, that you're using things that are not made for leaks or not meant for dirty use under the extreme circumstances. So again, we have the Torah that says you're allowed to. According to the Shulchan Aruch itself, it says you're not. He doesn't accept the opinion of the Torah. That said, it also have to take into account the damages that could be caused. Not again, we didn't get into the topic. If you remember, he says at the end of the last law, that hefsed meruba, right? If you have a lot of loss, what happens then? So if you have an expensive carpet, right? Or an expensive furniture that a bad leak is on, you don't have a bucket let's say you could use a bucket, but you don't have a bucket. Are you allowed to protect it on Shabbos because of great loss? Or in a case where it's dangerous, the kids are going to slip and hurt themselves. So that could fall under glass. But the question then would be how can you remove it? Can you what's better? If the Ramban says there's a lot, you have to look at it from many dimensions, right? So you have if you're just making a bowl unusable, and the problem is that you're creating something unusable on Shabbos, then it depends what does that mean? According to the Ramban, it falls under the prohibition of destroying on Shabbos. So then you have to ask yourself, what are you allowed to do? Because if that's destroying is one of the lamtas malachas. Then the question is, for instance, if there's a leak, how you allowed? I mean, if the leaks happen, what do you do then in the case we learned? If you want to clean up a leak, what could you use to clean up a leak? Are you allowed to? You're not allowed to squeeze out the towels, right? So there's all the you can put a lot of towels, just put it on top. But what happens if it's a continuous leak that only solves the problem for 5 minutes? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of questions that have to be examined in these scenarios. Again, they're not things that don't happen. They happen quite often. Like for instance, I'll give you an example. We had a leak that was really intense in my daughter's bedroom, not too long ago. And because of the size of the leak, I was using a laundry basket. Now, it didn't if the water clean, that I would say I want to use it for washing? No. Was it dirty enough that I would say I wouldn't wash it? No. So then it wasn't such a problem. But if it would have become really disgusting, the question is even a laundry basket something that I'm destroying? Because you don't really care about a laundry basket is not a salad bowl, right? So you just wash it out and you use it again. It's not like no one would throw out a laundry basket if I mean that I know of, that just because some dirty water went in it, right? Because it's a laundry basket. These are different questions that have to be examined for the details of the law. Okay, now we're going to a question that Rebecca mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago about a base for a prohibited object, which this happens all the time. Shabbos candles on your table is a base for a prohibited object. The candles are muktzeh, and now the table is the base for the candles, right? You're specifically putting the candles on the table and it's the base. You're not putting it there because for no reason. You want it on the table. So now the table becomes a base, i.e., an extension to the candles, to the candelabra. What happens then? What is the case? And this applies to many questions that we have on Shabbos that maybe one doesn't pay 100% attention to. Another example would be, what about placing your phone in your clothing drawer on Shabbos, or your wallet in your clothing drawer on Shabbos? That also becomes a base for something of muktzeh, right? The question is what kind of muktzeh it is, and what is the status of the base. But your traditional question is Shabbos candles left on the table itself doesn't make the table prohibited to use, but it becomes a question: could you move the table on Shabbos? All right. So these are the questions that we're going to tackle in this chapter 2089, which is a lot concerning a base for a prohibited object, and what is the reason of the base and how does it work. Okay. Again, we have to remember that this class was Baruch Hashem inspired and sponsored by Barbara. Thank you very much again. But our intentions is to start with the Kitzur and get to more details with Shemirath Shabbath Kehilchatah, that where we're going to discuss more of the contemporary questions. We're not there yet. And we have to remember that we are learning the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and it's important to learn Kitzur because when one learns Kitzur, means the short version of the code of the Jewish law. The reason why it's very important the Rebbe was very much promoting the idea of learning Kitzur because it's the short version. Sometimes you look at the actual text of the code of the Jewish law and you get overwhelmed. Wow, there's hundreds and hundreds of pages. There's a whole book in the Alter Rebbe on the laws of Shabbos. The person maybe get overwhelmed. So Kitzur is easier for a person to kind of tackle the subjects to get basic knowledge of the law. Of course, when you learn Kitzur, you have to know that you have to kind of, when you have questions, to look deeper, especially if you have any doubt, to ask your local rabbi what to do in questions that are not exactly addressed or possibly not clear from the Kitzur itself. Okay. So Kitzur, he says in chapter number 89, Kli Shaloi, you have your own vessel. There's a Dagish chair. It's yours. Sheniach alav be'erev Shabbos, you placed it on the eve of Shabbos, meaning before Shabbos comes in. Dover Muktzeh b'kavana, you put it there intentionally, i.e., you put your candelabras on your table Friday afternoon before Shabbos, meaning to say when the Shabbos crosses over from Friday afternoon into Shabbos, the prohibited thing is there and was yours that you were able to place it on it, and you did it there with intention to be there. Okay, those are the conditions. Your intention was that it should stay there as Shabbos comes in. If you put down your phone on the table with intention to be on the table, with the intention to remove it, and you forget it, that's different. Here we're not talking about you forgot it on the table. It means you could put it there with intention. It's yours, it's your table, it's your phone. You left it on the table, but you left it there. You wanted to move it before Shabbos, you forgot. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about you put it there with the intention that it should be there going into Shabbos, like your Shabbos, your candelabra on your table. Nasa hakli, then that vessel, i.e., in our case, the question that we're talking about is the table. Basis davar asur becomes a base to a prohibited something that's also something that's muktzeh. Again, there's many types of muktzeh. We learned about different types of muktzeh. Machmas chesaron kis, machmas gufay, machmas isur. Machmas ma'os, there's different types. So it can't become more severe than the thing itself. It becomes as severe as whatever it's a base to. Even if you removed it on Shabbos, or it's been removed on Shabbos, because it went through the twilight into the Shabbos with intention to be the base for that thing, and it was left there on purpose, it becomes a base for something that's prohibited. Going into the Shabbos, as soon as it crosses into Shabbos, now that thing becomes a muktzeh itself. The base becomes a muktzeh. And therefore, the whole Shabbos, it becomes prohibited even after the thing was removed. Even for itself, or if you want to use it, like we said before, a hammer could be used to crush shells, or if you need its place, it's still prohibited. We have to understand what that means. What about if the thing itself was mutter, machmas gufe, machmas mekoime? Okay. So he says like this. It was left if you intentionally place the muktzeh object upon your vessel on Friday. Okay, let's see the footnotes. According to some, this applies even where it is melachta li'isr and other muktzeh due to it being an object that is used for work prohibited on Shabbos, right? So let's say a phone, right? You're not allowed to use a phone on Shabbos or a candelabra. This is the most lenient type of muktzeh since you may move it when you need it for a permanent use or permitted use or for a space it occupies. So seemingly what he's saying in this footnote is that what we finished off, that the base is a base and it's not even allowed to be moved for a permitted use or for its space, it kind of basically takes on itself a more stringent muktzeh than the thing that it's a base to, which seems kind of I'm not going to use the word unfair, but doesn't seem how is that possible? How could it become more muktzeh than it's muktzeh too? That's just a base too. So says the Tehillah David 3081. The Yeshua's Yaakov is inclined to permit buses for Melachtil Isser that doesn't even become a buses. The Pri Megadim remains doubtful either way. Okay, seemingly let's wait let's put a pin on this footnote and we'll get back to it after we finish the remaining footnotes on this law. Okay, and you intend to use for it to be there. Okay, it has to be intended to be there, not meaning you haven't forgotten it there. Or if it's usual place for the muktzeh to be kept. Meaning to say, you don't have to sit there with your, your hands on your forehead and thinking, I want it to stay there. But, right, let's say you have, you leave your phone always on your table or on your counter or on a counter is not movable, but I'm saying on a movable object, or you have your phone on its base, right? That's its place. So, or if it's its usual place for the muktzeh to be kept, so says the Mishnah Berurah 309:18. Accordingly, money. So that's a question like this: money that has been that was left in a purse would render the purse a basis. If you leave money in your purse, seemingly the purse becomes a base for the money, and that's its place. You don't have to say, "I'm thinking that my wallet should stay in my purse until after Shabbos." That's always where you keep your wallet. That's always where it stays. However, the Bir Halacha cites the Derech HaChaim that the purse is not a basis. Why? Why is the purse not a base? What's the reason? A possible explanation might be that he is referring to a purse which is normally empty before Shabbos. Okay. See the Chazon Ish, also Mishnah Berurah 3:1. So basically he's saying is if you have a purse, let's say the difference would be something more familiar to us is a fanny pack versus a pocketbook, right? So a purse that a woman has, let's say a man purse, that a person has that always keeps you keep the money in the wallet, right? That's always its place. Whereas a fanny pack is something you only use temporarily, usually empty it out. So something that's is always emptied out, so then it doesn't become a base. Why? Because if you left it there, you didn't leave it there with intention to stay there, unless your mamish left it there with intention to stay there. Okay. On the onset of Shabbos, see paragraph 5. This applies only if you intended it to remain there for the entire twilight period. Question is, what about if Ben Hashmashis is kind of not Shabbos is the question, right? We learn in Tractate of Shabbos the laws of Ben Hashmashis in twilight. Twilight is not exactly night, so it's things that you're not allowed to do Ben Hashmashis, right? What happens if Ben Hashmashis is a period of time, so it's not a second. So what happens if you want it to be there in the beginning of Ben Hashmashis, but to be removed afterwards? So then, and it stayed there. Does it become a basis? That's just saying an example. If let's say always I don't want to get into the laws about this, but just like an example, if you light the candles and then it's moved after Shabbos, some people have that custom where they don't light it ben hashmashis because the man's not allowed to move it either. Some women we light our candles before Shkia, and some people will have the custom to light it, and then men will move the candles after it's lit, right? So Rabbi Kiva Eger Pri Megadim Shulchan Aruch Harav Mishnah Berurah. Okay, let's try to see if we could just finish the next footnote and open up to final questions. Something that was muktzeh at twilight remains muktzeh for the rest of Shabbos, even if the cause of the muktzeh was removed. Okay. Footnote number 5 is a basis attains the same degree of muktzeh as the muktzeh object which has created the basis. Okay, so this is an important footnote. Meaning to say, like I said, you can't the space can't become more muktzeh than what caused the base to be muktzeh, right? Something that's muktzeh, machmas gufay, a hammer, which is allowed to be used for its place, can't make the table more muktzeh than the muktzeh itself. That becomes the question, because he says over here in footnote number 1, that's how I wanted to wait. He says that the Tehillah David says that according to some, this applies even if it is melachte le'isr, which is the most lenient, then the table becomes the muktzeh, since it's removed when you need for permitted use of space. He seemingly footnote number 1 and number 5 kind of contradict each other, but we'll have to examine that again, because again, footnote number 1 is saying that according to some, let's read this again. This applies even if it were according to some, this applies even where it is melachti l'isra, meaning it's a base for something that's aser, which means the most lenient that could be used for a permitted use or for its space. This is the most lenient muktzeh, since you may move it when you need it permitted. So the question is like this. See, what I can understand, what we can explain that the Tehillah David means to say is that if you don't need the space of the base and you don't need to use it for a permitted use, then it is still muktzeh for that. Meaning the thinking would be that if it's a base for something that anyways could be moved, if it's taking up space, and anyways could be moved if you have a permissible use, maybe the base doesn't even become a base of something that's muktzeh, and it's never permitted, it doesn't come prohibited on Shabbos. But together with that, you have to add footnote number 5, but it doesn't get more strict than the thing it's a base for. Just like so meaning to say, if the table is taking up space, if you want to move the table for the table itself, that's something that because you want the table to be somewhere else and you want to sit somewhere else, that's not allowed, because you're moving the muktzeh for the muktzeh itself. But if the table is taking up space somewhere, that's another question, because if you're allowed to move the thing itself, why can't you move the table that is the base to it? Okay, we'll examine all these questions further next week when we get more into the law of a base. A bus is the davras. Any questions before we complete the class? Alrighty. Laila tov everyone, and good Shabbos. Shakach.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Welcome.